Berlin, February 1933. Reich Chancellery, midnight. Snow scraped across the streets of Berlin in long white streaks, driven by a bitter wind that rattled windows and seeped beneath doors. Germany was exhausted, politically, economically, spiritually. But inside the Reich Chancellery, sleep was impossible. The meeting room glowed under heavy chandeliers, smoke hanging beneath the ceiling like storm clouds. Senior officers of the Reichswehr sat stiffly around the long oak table, uniforms crisp despite the late hour. Hermann Goering lounged with practiced arrogance, while Joseph Goebbels quietly observed everyone in the room with sharp, restless eyes. Heinrich Himmler sat nearly motionless, pale fingers folded together. At the head of the table stood Adolf Hitler, impatient, not angry yet, but close. "This had better be worthwhile," one general muttered under his breath. Hitler ignored him. The summons itself had unsettled everyone present. No official explanation, no agenda. Only a direct order from Hitler insisting attendance was mandatory for a private audience with a man whose identity remained undisclosed. That alone was unusual. Hitler protected access to himself carefully. He did not arrange mysterious midnight meetings for strangers, especially not now, only days after consolidating power as Chancellor. Goering finally broke the silence. "So who is this ghost?" he asked, exhaling cigar smoke. "Industrialist? Foreign envoy? Some nationalist financier?" Hitler's jaw tightened slightly. "He is someone who claims to have assisted the movement before victory." "Claims?" Goebbels asked quietly. A pause. "He provided information in the past that proved accurate." That answer did not comfort anyone. The room fell silent again, except for the ticking of the wall clock and the distant howl of winter outside. Then footsteps. Slow, measured, approaching from beyond the double doors. Every man in the room turned toward the sound instinctively. Not hurried footsteps, not nervous ones. Confident. The guards outside spoke briefly in low German. The latch clicked. The doors began to open. Cold air slipped into the room first. Then your silhouette appeared in the doorway. The doors swung inward. Cold Berlin air rolled across the polished floor as you stepped into the chamber without hesitation. Every eye fixed on you immediately. You offered no salute, no apology for the interruption, only a brief nod. "Gentlemen." The room remained silent. Hitler studied you carefully from the far end of the table, his expression controlled but intensely curious. Goering leaned back in his chair with visible skepticism, while Himmler watched like a predator measuring distance. You walked forward slowly and placed a thin black object onto the oak table. None of them recognized it. "I will keep this brief," you said calmly. "I represent a group of beings with a vested interest in your future." Several officers exchanged uneasy looks. Goebbels narrowed his eyes. "Beings?" "You may interpret that however you wish." Your gaze moved across the room deliberately. "I know who you are. I know your ambitions, your intention to rebuild Germany through war, your plans for expansion. I know about the camps already being discussed behind closed doors." That made several faces harden instantly. You continued before anyone could interrupt. "What I offer tonight is simple. 2 gifts. 2 technologies beyond anything currently possessed on Earth." You tapped the black device once. The screen illuminated instantly. Several men physically recoiled. One general muttered, "What in God's name?" Moving images appeared across the glass surface. Machines, weapons, night skies lit by engines unlike anything they had ever seen. You set the tablet upright. You may choose 2 of the following 6 advantages. Images shifted as you spoke. First, the HK-91 rifle. Lightweight, accurate, semi-automatic. A weapon decades ahead of your current infantry arms. A new image appeared. Second, night vision goggles. The ability for soldiers to see in darkness. Another. Third, Black Hawk helicopters. Flying troop transports capable of changing warfare entirely. Several officers leaned forward unconsciously. Fourth, GPS mapping. Near-perfect battlefield navigation and targeting. Another swipe. Fifth, ballistic body armor capable of stopping many battlefield rounds. Then the final option. Sixth, a 20% increase in industrial production capability through advanced manufacturing methods. Silence consumed the room. Even Goering had stopped posturing. Hitler stared at the tablet with almost religious intensity. You let the weight of it settle before speaking again. "In return, there is one condition." Your voice became colder. "No extermination camps." The room changed instantly. Himmler's face darkened. You continued anyway. "Use Jews in industry, finance, military labor. Exile them if you must. Imprison political enemies if you believe necessary. But no industrialized extermination." The only sound now was the faint hum of the tablet screen. "You want war," you said. "Fine. You want empire. Fine. But mass extermination crosses a line my associates will not permit." Hitler finally spoke. "And if we refuse?" The tablet screen went black. "Then you receive nothing." A long silence followed. Hitler slowly walked around the table, eyes still fixed on the dead screen. The others looked between him and you, trying to understand whether this was madness, deception, or something far beyond either. Then Hitler asked quietly, "And if we agree?" You met his eyes evenly. "Then Germany receives the future." The room froze in anticipation, and behind your calm expression, your mind reached outward silently toward theirs, listening for deception buried beneath ambition. Hitler remained standing beside the table, one hand resting near the strange black device as though afraid it might disappear. The generals erupted first. "That flying machine alone changes warfare," one officer whispered. "Night combat superiority," another muttered. Goering pointed immediately at the helicopter footage replaying silently on the tablet. "With those aircraft, we could bypass fortifications entirely." "Assuming this is real," Himmler said sharply. You said nothing. Instead, you listened, not to their words, to their thoughts. The room became layered, spoken conversation on the surface, raw intention underneath. Goering's mind burned with greed and spectacle. The helicopters alone would make the Luftwaffe untouchable. Several generals focused on practical concerns, supply lines, mobility, impossible tactical advantages. Goebbels was fascinated less by the weapons than by you. What are you? But Hitler's thoughts cut through all of them, focused, calculating, hungry. Industrial production changes everything. If Germany can outproduce rivals sooner, rearm faster, war comes earlier and stronger. Then another thought followed. The night vision. No nation on earth could match it. You watched him carefully. Out loud, Hitler finally spoke. "The production increase," he said quietly. "Explain it." You activated the tablet again. Images appeared of vast factories, assembly lines, modern machining processes, optimized logistics networks, steel output charts, fuel refinement, vehicle production. Everything accelerated. Several officers stared in disbelief. Hitler's eyes narrowed with realization. Not flashy, not glorious, but terrifyingly powerful. Goering immediately objected. "No, the helicopters, they require fuel, infrastructure, training, maintenance," one general interrupted. "But revolutionary!" "And useless if we cannot sustain total war," another replied. The debate intensified. You listened deeper. Most of the military minds increasingly drifted toward two conclusions: industrial production, night vision, because unlike helicopters, they could be absorbed into Germany immediately and multiplied across the entire military machine. Then your attention returned to Himmler. Unlike the others, he barely cared about the technology now. His thoughts circled only one subject: the condition. No extermination. This outsider understands too much. And beneath that, we would agree now and remove him later. Your expression did not change, but now you knew. At least one man in the room was already lying. You stepped forward before anyone else could speak. The sharp sound of your boots against the floor silenced the argument immediately. Your eyes locked directly onto Himmler. Then your voice cut through the chamber hard enough to make several men flinch. "I want to be clear." You slowly looked around the room. "If you agree tonight," your eyes returned to Himmler, "then you agree." Silence. "You are free to refuse me." A pause. "You are not free to deceive me." For the first time since you entered the room, uncertainty crossed Himmler's face. You took another step. You already considered betrayal. Several heads turned toward Himmler instantly. He said nothing, because he could not. You spoke quietly now, almost conversationally. That was your first mistake. The room felt colder. Do not make a second. Nobody spoke, not even Hitler, because the atmosphere in the room had changed completely. This no longer felt like a negotiation between politicians. It felt like a negotiation with something they did not understand. Himmler swallowed once, very subtly. But inside his mind, the certainty had cracked, and Hitler noticed it too. You reached over and powered down the tablet. The glowing screen vanished instantly, plunging the room back into the yellow light of chandeliers and cigarette smoke. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody even seemed willing to breathe too loudly. Then you spoke calmly, almost casually, as though the previous threats had never happened. "I will give you 30 days to consider the offer." Your eyes moved slowly across the room. You may refuse it entirely. That is your choice. Several generals exchanged uneasy looks. Refusal no longer felt simple after what they had witnessed. You continued. When you are prepared to give your answer, when your final decision is made, your gaze settled on Hitler. Have Hitler whisper one word into the night wind. The room leaned into the silence. HODR. The unfamiliar word hung heavily in the air. Goebbels immediately memorized it. Himmler hated it instinctively. Hitler repeated it once under his breath. HODR. You turned toward the doors. And I will return. No farewell, no salute. You simply walked away. The doors opened again, cold winter air rushing inward around your silhouette. Then they shut behind you with a deep wooden thud. Silence. Long silence. Finally, Goering spoke first, his voice quieter than anyone had ever heard it. What the hell was that? Nobody answered, because across the room Adolf Hitler still stared at the dark tablet left sitting on the oak table, wondering whether Germany had just met its salvation or something far more dangerous. For the first several minutes after you left, nobody discussed strategy at all. They argued about reality. Goering insisted it had to be some kind of advanced foreign deception. A projector hidden in the device, clever engineering, nothing more. But even he did not sound convinced. One general quietly pointed out the obvious. No projector exists that small. Goebbels became obsessed almost immediately, not with the weapons, with you. He ordered background investigations through every party channel available. Financial records, military intelligence, industrial contacts, aristocratic circles, nationalist organizations. Weeks of searching produced almost nothing consistent. That disturbed him more than if they had found evidence. Men do not simply appear beside history, he muttered privately to Hitler one evening. Hitler replied, "Sometimes they do." Himmler reacted differently. Paranoia. Within days, he quietly tasked trusted SS personnel to investigate occult societies, secret organizations, and old Germanic myths connected to the word HODR. He convinced himself you were either part of a hidden order or something bordering on supernatural. But the more he investigated, the more unsettled he became. Because the name fit disturbingly well. HODR, the blind god associated with darkness and fate. Meanwhile, the military discussions became increasingly serious. The generals split into camps. One faction desperately wanted the helicopters. They saw them as miracle weapons capable of bypassing trenches, rivers, and fortifications entirely. Another faction argued the helicopters were too advanced for Germany's current infrastructure. Fuel consumption alone would cripple deployment. Maintenance requirements would be impossible. Pilots would require years of retraining. Gradually, support shifted elsewhere. The industrial production increase began dominating every conversation. Not glamorous, not emotional, but terrifyingly practical. 20% more steel, 20% more vehicles, 20% more ammunition. An economy already mobilizing for war would become a machine unlike anything Europe had ever seen. Hitler understood this faster than most. Several meetings with industrial leaders followed during those weeks. Krupp, Thyssen, armament planners, railway officials. He never mentioned you directly, but privately he began asking a new question repeatedly. What limits production most? The second debate centered on night vision. The army officers became fascinated by it. The ability to attack in darkness while enemies remained effectively blind was viewed as almost mystical. One officer reportedly said, "With this, entire divisions become ghosts." Body armor received interest but less excitement, useful but not war-changing. GPS mapping created confusion because they lacked the technological foundation to fully grasp how revolutionary satellite navigation truly was. Some understood its military value immediately, others thought it sounded implausible or overly dependent on invisible infrastructure. By the third week, consensus quietly formed among most serious planners. Industrial production, night vision. The combination was horrifyingly efficient, not theatrical, not symbolic, practical tools for winning a long industrial war. But beneath all strategic discussions sat the real issue, your condition. No extermination camps. That debate became increasingly tense. Himmler argued repeatedly that ideological purity could not be compromised. Several military officers, however, cared little about racial doctrine compared to military effectiveness. One general bluntly remarked, "A dead worker produces nothing." That nearly started a shouting match. Hitler listened more than he spoke during those weeks. That alone unnerved everyone, because when Hitler became quiet, it usually meant he was calculating, and privately, alone at night, his thoughts kept returning not just to the weapons, but to you. Your certainty, your knowledge, the way you had spoken to him without fear. By the 29th night, Hitler had still not made the final decision publicly, but deep down, most of the men closest to him already knew what he would choose, because the temptation was too great, and because for the first time in his life, Adolf Hitler believed someone might exist who truly held power beyond nations. Berlin, March 1933, night. The city slept beneath freezing rain. High above the streets, Adolf Hitler stood alone on the balcony outside his private office, coat shifting lightly in the wind. Berlin's lights stretched endlessly into the darkness beyond the Reich Chancellery. Behind him, the building was nearly silent. He had spent the entire evening arguing with generals, industrialists, and party officials. The decision was made, though not unanimously. Himmler had objected until the end. Goebbels remained wary. Goering still wanted the helicopters, but the military planners had won the argument. Industrial production, night vision, the most practical path to domination. Yet Hitler's thoughts were not on the weapons now. They were on the condition. No extermination. He hated compromise, but he also understood leverage. And somewhere deep inside himself, beneath ideology and ambition, another realization had begun forming over the past month. The stranger had not feared him, not politically, not physically, not spiritually. That unsettled him more than any threat. Rain tapped softly against stone as Hitler looked out into the Berlin night. Then, quietly, almost embarrassed by the absurdity of it, he whispered into the wind, "HODR." Nothing happened. For several seconds, only rain and distant traffic answered him. Then the lights across the balcony flickered once. The temperature dropped sharply. Hitler froze. Behind him, inside the office, every clock stopped ticking simultaneously.